Sometimes you never really know how you're going to react until the situation actually happens. I always read where everyone seems to have the answers, but yet, they on opposite sides of the subject. I grew up in a broken home. Mom and Dad argued all the time, and one day Dad walked out on us. I was 9 at the time, and I really didn't understand it all. I had an older brother and sister, but they were now out of the house. He was 21, and she was 19, and they were both in college at the time. They are both now married and live in other states. I might only see them during a holiday, or if they visit while on vacation, they're not very close to Mom since she got remarried as best as I can understand it. I was what you call a love child. I was born when my parents were hoping to save their marriage. At the time, I guess it went all right for a while, but their bickering and arguing started all over again. I think the straw that broke the camel's back was Dad found out Mom had cheated on him. She said it was because he cheated on her first years ago. This crap went on, and until Mom blurted out one time that I might not even be Dad's son. I know it was because it all was said in the heat of the argument, but Dad ended up having a DNA test done. He and Mom were both shocked when it came back that Dad was not my biological father. Dad started divorce proceedings the next day at 9 a.m. He was the only dad I ever knew. He worked all the time, and we weren't all that close, but now there was no one after the divorce. I talked to him once in a while, but it wasn't the same anymore when I asked Mom who my father was. She said she wasn't sure. She always thought it was Dad. Life was hard for me after that as I grew up. I later learned that Mom was somewhat of a party woman. She married young and had my brother and sister both before she was 21. She started going out with some of the women she worked with. Dad traveled a lot since he was a truck driver, so I know they both constantly cheated on one another after the divorce. Mom didn't remarry until I was 18, but she did bring a number of men to the house. Usually it was when I was gone to my friends or at my grandparents' home. They never spent the night when I was home. That leads to when I got married. I was 22 at the time and met Marion. She was a secretary in the lumber yard where I worked. I asked her out and we became friends, and then lovers very quickly. We were married within the year. She was always the flirty type, but I always thought it was just part of her personality. She seemed to be friends with everyone. She was 20 when I met her and said she was a virgin. To be honest, I never knew for sure then, but now I know the real story. Our life was what I would have called normal. We went to the movies, visited friends and relatives, ate out about half the time, sometimes Mary, and would cook meals for us at home. It was usually macaroni and cheese or something else that was easy to make lots of heat and serve dinners. I didn't mind. We both worked, and I knew she wasn't much of a cook when we dated, when we went out with friends. I always wondered about Mary and having sex with other men. I know it was because of the way my mother was. I didn't want to think that way, but it was lodged into my mind. I never told Mary and about my mother other than she dated. The last thing I would have told my wife was that I was a peeping Tom and watched my mother have sex with a number of men. Our sex life I would have considered normal. The reason we got married was because she got pregnant when she told me I asked her to marry me. I felt it was the right thing to do. I liked her a lot and figured I could grow to love her. Her family hated me from the start. I guess it began because they blamed me for not using protection and getting their pregnant in their eyes marred and could do no wrong. I was fighting an uphill battle from the start. The only one in her family that liked me was her sister, Kathy. She was 2 years younger than Mary, and she was a lot more quiet and kept to herself, where Mary and was outgoing. I guess I always had a thing for Kathy because she was the only one in the family that talked to me in her 5th month of pregnancy. Mary and lost the baby. That was 2 years ago. We've been married for almost 3 years now. I've asked her if she has ever been with another man, and she always tells me she hasn't during our lovemaking. I've asked her if she ever thought about it, and she told me she doesn't need another man. I was more than enough for her. I was young and stupid and really didn't know much about life when I graduated. My mom's new husband told me it was time for me to be out on my own. I found a cheap apartment, found a job at the lumber yard, and had a pretty good life going. I dated a few girls because, like most young men, I was a horny merd and went to a junior college in our town, and after graduating started working as a secretary at our lumber yard. Needless to say, young, good-looking women was always a nice sight. We dated, and by the third date began having sex. She was born and raised in Steubenville, Ohio, which was about 40 mil away. She would go home some weekends to see your family. When they met me, they really didn't care for me. I later found out that Mary used to date a guy named Rob, whom her parents loved. I guess he was a football star when they were in high school, Mary, and broke up with him when she was going away to college. He got a job in the steel mill where his dad worked. I guess they made pretty good money, and since Rob's dad was in management, he could be on a fast track to a promotion. I later learned from Kathy that Rob got pissed and quickly married one of Marion's friends, Sheila. They now have 2 kids of their own. Sheila and Mary don't get along anymore. That's why Marion stayed in our town after her graduation. She rooed with an aunt till we got married. I don't know her aunt all that well. We got married at the courthouse. Her parents didn't even attend. Her sister Kathy did show up as well as her aunt since the loss of the baby, Mary, and her parents have made up. I rarely visited them, but enjoyed when Kathy comes to see us. I guess I shouldn't feel this way, but I do. Mary had made a lot of friends in our town. Some are people we work with, and others are our neighbors. I know she has gone out with her friends, but they are all married, and to the best of my knowledge, she hasn't been unfaithful. She has told me that she has danced with other men if the girls went to a lounge, but that was all she ever did a few times. She had come home pretty horny, and the sex was great, especially if she had too much to drink. I honestly believe she was faithful to me, that was, until we went out of town to her cousin's wedding. It was only 40 mile away in Steubenville, the city where she grew up and graduated from high school. She introduced me to so many people that it was almost like a high school reunion as well as a wedding. We both drank quite a bit, seeing we were staying in the motel where the reception was being held. I told her I wouldn't stay at her parents' house. They hardly even talked to me at the wedding. The trouble started when a lot of her old friends wanted to dance with her. I couldn't say much since her female cousins and friends asked me to dance as well. I held them close but didn't get inappropriate with any of them. I couldn't say the same about Moran. She was outright flirting, which she does when she drinks. Her cousin said she was always like that, but was harmless. I did enjoy dancing with Kathy. She was just one of those people I enjoy being around. I made sure I didn't do anything inappropriate with her, but did like holding her in my arms. I did tell her I didn't approve of the way Mary was acting. She didn't say anything about it, but I don't think she cared for the way Mary was acting either. I told Mary, and when I danced a slow dance with her, that I didn't approve of what she was doing, and she just called me an old party pooper and said she would dance with who she wanted and the way she wanted. After that, I wasn't doing much dancing, but a lot of drinking and watching Mary and being groped over and over again. She would rub her body against a guy and then looked at me and laugh. I never laughed back. There were basically 3 guys that she was dancing the most with inappropriately. 2 were old high school friends, and the other was just a friend of theirs. I've never seen her quite this wild before. I went up to her again and told her to cut this out, or we would be leaving. She told me she was having fun, and if I wanted to leave, then just leave. She wasn't going anywhere. I went over by the back wall, kind of out of the way, and watched her. I was getting more and more pissed. It was getting late, and some of the partygoers were starting to leave. I figured it was finally over and I could get over it. I went to the restroom and took a needed piss. When I came back out, Mary was gone. I looked all over for her and even asked a couple of her cousins if they had seen her. I saw 2 of the guys that were with her earlier. One was her old schoolmate. They said Rob took her up to her room. She was drunk and quite out of it. They laughed. But I didn't think it was funny. As I headed up to our room, when I walked in, she wasn't there. I was worried that he had taken her to his room instead. I had no idea which one it might have been. Our room was on the 3rd floor. I went down to the front desk and asked what room her friends were in. I found out they were on the 1st floor facing the pool, so they had 2 door entrances. I walked down the hall and saw the 2 guys I had talked to getting ready to enter the room. They must have all been rooming together. They looked back at me and laughed as they entered the room. I went down the hall and heard a woman's voice. I knew it was Moran. I banged on the door, and one of the guys opened it. I could immediately see Moran on her knees, lying across the bed with her back in the air. This Rob guy had his meat buried in her. What the hell, I yelled Mary, and was so into being drilled I don't think she even heard me. This guy Tony told me that she came in willingly, and I could either watch or leave. He reminded me that there was 3 of them, and only 1 of me, and if I caused any trouble, I would be getting my bum kicked. Tony also had a knife. He was right 1-on-1. I could hold my own with any one of them, but 3 together I didn't stand a chance. I heard Marion ask Rob who came into the room. He told her it was Tony and Ben. "My God, Rob, they can see me naked." He laughed and said, "They're going to do more than just see you. Ben has wanted you for years, and I told him and Tony that they could have a go at you. After all, you've been rubbing your body and teasing them all night." Marion didn't say anything as Ben helped Rob take off rest of her clothes and turned her over. Tony stood next to me to make sure I didn't cause any trouble. He held a knife to my throat. I stayed there and sat on a chair out of the way as one after the other they screwed her and she was begging them for more. I honestly don't know why I didn't at least try to put a stop to this knife or no knife. I guess it was because Mary and was asking to be drilled, and after what I saw, she was not worth fighting for her anymore. When Tony realized I wasn't going to put up a fight, he joined the others. I sat there like the chump I was. Tony had just finished screwing her. Damn, she's one good one. Said Tony. I didn't mention it before, but Tony was a light-skinned man. I would guess he was of mixed race. Moran sat up, and that's when she saw me for the first time. "Oh my God, Jim, what are you doing here?" she yelled out, watching a lying 304 of a wife getting drilled. "Don't go telling me you were being forced. I heard you asking for more." I yelled at her. "I'm sorry, Jim. I had too much to drink. Tony, Ben, please let me up. This was a big mistake. I need to go talk with my husband." She must have sobered up a little. Watching my wife drilling other men made me want to puke. "No way you're going anywhere, sweetie, till we're through with you," replied Ben. "No, look, you have to let me go. My marriage depends on it," said Moran. "Your marriage is over." I said to Moran. They looked back at me and laughed and called me a weak cuck. I shook my head and walked out the door. They were right. I went up to my room and packed my things. I knew my marriage to Mary and was over. My problem now was I was made a cuck. And these a-holes made me one. I knew deep down that I had to get even with them at any cost. I couldn't go through life letting these a-holes do this to me. I knew one at a time I could take them. I just had to bide my time and do my best not to get caught. I packed my luggage, and even though I had drunk a lot, I headed for home. I figured when they got through with Mary and she would go up to our room and sleep it off. She had enough friends and relatives that lived nearby that she would find a way home at 10. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Marin Jim. "How could you just leave me there? I can't believe any man would leave his wife like that. How am I supposed to get home? Ask one of your boyfriends, offer them a BJ or some sex for a ride home." "Oh, they already got that, didn't they?" "Jim, I'm sorry, it was a mistake. I drank too much. I didn't mean for that to happen. They took advantage of me when you left the party. They were going to walk me to my room, but took me to theirs instead. First, I didn't leave the party. I went to the restroom, and when I returned, you had left with your old boyfriend. It took me a while to find out where you were as far as the taking advantage of you. I'll come and get you if you file sexual assault charges against them. Have them arrested, otherwise I'll have to say you were totally willing and our marriage is over." I knew our marriage was over anyway, but I wanted to see what Moran would say. "I can't file charges against them. Everyone will know what happened." "Yeah, right, you were totally willing, and now have remorse. By the way, I'm filing for divorce tomorrow on the grounds of adultery. Everybody will know anyway. You can have the apartment. Me and a couple of my friends are moving out. My stuff. Have a good life." I hung up. She did get home that evening. Her sister Kathy drove her home. I got a storage locker for most of my stuff and got a room that rents by the week. I didn't need much. I went into the lumber yard on Monday and quit my job, Mary, and didn't show up for work that day. I'm not sure why, but it made it a lot easier for me. I told my boss I was moving out of state and gave him a local post office box number to send my final checks and my savings plan that I cashed in. I had my pickup truck that was paid for and went to the bank and took half of the money out of our savings account. I had our checkbook and paid off the balance of our credit card, at least the one that had my name on it. I was pretty much out of any debt that I helped incur. I left the checkbook at the bank and told them to give it to Mary, and when she came in for the next few days, I tried to formulate some kind of plan. After receiving my money, I had $2,000 for my part of our savings, and checking I would be getting $15,000 in a week from my job savings, and another $2,000 from my last paycheck and vacation pay. I did contact a lawyer and filed for a divorce. He told me I needed names and proof. If I were going to use adultery for divorce, my other option was a dissolution. But I wanted everyone to know the witch that Mary and was the lawyer went ahead and sent Mary and the papers he mentioned to her that I didn't want to speak to her, and if she had any questions to contact him, I did buy a cell phone and gave my mom the number, as well as the lawyer. I knew that there was a lumber yard in West Virginia just across the Ohio border. I had met the owner a few times when he came to a few lumber company meetings. He told me if I ever wanted a job to look him up. I never thought I would be taking him up on it. I had a meeting with him and said I needed a job and explained that I was getting a divorce and that my wife worked for my old company. He promised not to tell my ex-employer that I was working for him and I could start the following Monday. I found myself a trailer for sale, pretty cheap. It was set up in a trailer park, I picked up my stuff out of storage and moved in. Luckily, it had a lot of furniture in it, so I didn't have to go buy a lot of things. I stopped by a Bob Evans restaurant outside of Steubenville and couldn't believe my waitress was Kathy, my soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law. She looked mad when she saw me. "Why did you leave Moran?" She said you were mad because she danced with her old boyfriends and left her at the wedding then. When she went in your room, you had left her stranded with no way to get home. I took her home the next morning and you had moved out. How could you do such a thing? I never thought you liked that. She said, "Most of what you said isn't true. I don't have time to explain the whole story. If you want to know the truth, give me a call and we can meet and I'll tell you the truth. Your sister is a lying, cheating 304. I know Kathy was surprised when I called her sister at cheating 304. I never talked that way around Kathy. I gave her my phone number and asked one favor of her, and that was to not give that phone number to Moran. For some reason, I felt I could trust Kathy. I ate breakfast and headed over to my new job. The only people that knew where I was working was Kathy and my lawyer. It was funny that I was only 15 miles from Marion's hometown of Steubenville. I was surprised that I did get a call from Kathy the following day. She worked mornings at the restaurant and went to college in the afternoon. She was taking courses in nursing and was just about finished. She had about a half year to go. She agreed to meet me for dinner at a restaurant in West Virginia. After she got out of classes, she told me she wanted the truth and didn't feel she was getting it from Mary. And needless to say, Mary and had everyone else convinced it was my jealousy that broke up our marriage. My job at the lumber yard was hard work, but kept me physically fit. I got all the exercise I needed some days. I went out and had a few beers with some of my fellow workers. I would usually get something to eat and then to bed to get some rest. I kept in touch with my lawyer, and he told me he needed the names and addresses of the men who had sex with Moran. All I knew was their first names: Ben, Tony, and Rob. I hoped that Kathy might help me out when we met for dinner. She wasn't in the best mood. She heard from Mary, and that I was trying to divorce her on the grounds of adultery, and Mary, and said they were unfounded. We ordered dinner, and I told Kathy that I would be totally honest with her. I had no reason to lie as we were eating. I told her about the way that Mary acted at the wedding. She did say she thought that Marian was overdoing the flirting, and Mary admitted to it. Then I told her the rest of the story. I mentioned that I went to the restroom, and when I came out, Marian was gone, and so was her friend Rob. I let her know that I talked to Tony and Ben, and they said that Rob took Mary up to our room, but when I got there, she wasn't there. I went into detail about finding her in Rob's room with his friends, how she was having sex with them and didn't even know I was there. How could you just sit there and watch them having sex with Moran? I can't believe you just sat there and did nothing. I guess I just froze when I first saw her. Then she was begging them to continue. Tony had a knife, and he did tell me it was 3 against 1. I would have probably fought them anyway, if Marian was being assaulted. But the sex with these 3 a-holes was consensual. When Marian turned around and saw me, she asked them to stop. She told me she made a mistake. I called her a 304 wife, and that I would be getting a divorce. I went back to our room, got my things, and went home. I was gone when you dropped her off at home the next day. I swear to God, it's the absolute truth. I would never lie to you. I care for you too much. I even mentioned to Mary and that if she filed assault charges against them, that I would come pick her up at the motel. She told me she couldn't do that. Kathy stared at me for what seemed like the longest time. I believed that she could see the truth in my eyes. That's when I asked her for a favor. "Kathy, I need the last names and addresses of Rob, Tony, and Ben. Would you be able to get them for me?" She looked at me and then away for a few seconds. "What do you want with them?" she asked. "I need them in my divorce statement. I'm getting the divorce on grounds of adultery. My lawyer told me that I need that information. Can you get it for me?" "Do you know what you're asking, Mary, and is my sister, and you want me to betray her and side with you?" "No, that's not true. All I'm asking for is the full names and addresses of the men who had sex with my wife. You can't betray her if she didn't do anything wrong, can you? I know you well enough that you know I'm telling the truth, Kathy. I can still find out the information. If you don't want to help me, it would just be faster since I know you already know their names. I guess more than anything, I want us to stay friends, okay? I'll get you what you want. I have to tell you that I don't know if I totally believe you. Stop in Thursday. That's when I work again, and I'll have it for you Thursday before work." I stopped in the restaurant and asked to be seated in Kathy's section. I thought I saw her smile when she looked my way. When she came to my table, she slipped me a folded piece of paper, and I put it in my pocket. I thanked her and ordered breakfast. I saw my lawyer after work and gave him a copy of the information I picked up. He told me that Marian had called him and said she wasn't going to sign the papers if it said divorce because of adultery. However, if we had a dissolution due to irreconcilable differences, she would agree to that it had something to do with ruining her reputation. My lawyer told me that was my best option. The problem was that there was no proof to the allegation I was charging her within the divorce. I didn't have any other witnesses other than myself, and the three men surely wouldn't admit to having sex with Mary, and no video, no pictures, nothing to prove it happened. It was just my word against hers. I went along with the lawyer and applied for a dissolution. He said it would be finalized in about 4 months. I then got more bad news since I was on the lease, and it would have to be renewed again. In 2 months, I would have to pay half the rent for the next 2 months. Then I could be removed from the rental agreement after that. At least I would rid myself of the lying. The only problem was my need for some type of revenge. I was made a cuck and sat there and took it looking back. I should have just walked out instead of watching Mary and then listening to her telling them how good it felt now. Now I also remember Rob asking her if it was as good as it used to be. I remembered feeling sad when she said yes. Now Marianne gets away with being the one that people believed I'm just considered a jealous husband. My lawyer and Kathy are the only two I told the whole truth to. I figured it would all come out in the divorce, but now it was just a dissolution. I did tell my friends and the guys that I work with that my wife cheated on me but didn't give any details. It was bad enough that let alone that I stayed and watched it happen. In the following months I worked and would stop and see Kathy at the restaurant every chance I got. She gave me her work schedule, and I ate there if she was working. It was an extra 15 mil to drive, but I didn't care. I asked her out, and she told me she would love to go out with me, but not until after the divorce. No one in her family knew that we were seeing each other, even though it was only at her work. One day she looked sad when I came in. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that Mary and was dating Rob again. It's only been 2 months since the two of you separated, and she's already back with him. I thought Rob was married. He is. I went to see her one day, and he was at your old apartment when she came to the door. I could see what they had been doing. All she had on was a robe, and her hair was a mess. He was buttoning his shirt coming out of the bedroom. I didn't even go in after seeing them. I called her a 304 and told her that she didn't deserve you. All she said was, "Don't tell Mom and Dad I left," knowing that everything you told me was probably true. I'm sorry for doubting you. It had now been over 3.5 months since I applied for the divorce. I got a call from Kathy telling me she needed to see me. We met after she got out of class one evening. I was just happy to see her. We met in a lounge outside of the city. We sat in a booth and ordered a drink. "Okay, what's up?" I asked. You seemed very nervous on the phone. "Moran's pregnant. I heard her tell Mom last night. She told Mom that you're the father. We haven't been together for over 5 months. How far along is she?" "She told Mom around 3.5 months. It must have happened about the time you left her. Are you sure it can't possibly be yours?" "I'm positive, but it's going to mess up my dissolution." "Damn that I'm sorry. I know she's your sister, but I hate her for what she has done. All I can say is I married the wrong sister. What asked Kathy if Marian hadn't gotten pregnant, I would not have married her. You see, I had a crush on you, but I wanted to do what was right by Mary, and then we got married. I know that she never loved me, but I put in a real effort. Now I have to wonder if the first baby was even mine to begin with. Knowing she was sleeping around Kathy didn't say anything. I think she was a bit shocked. Then she said, 'Why didn't you ever say anything to me?' Asked Kathy would it have done. I thought it best to just hold it in. Besides, I didn't know how you felt and nothing would have changed, but everything would have been very uncomfortable for both of us. I wanted to make my marriage work, but I guess your sister had other ideas. I'm sorry, I really am. I liked you too and thought of how lucky Moran was, Jim. I have to leave now. Please don't let anyone know I told you about Moran. I just thought you should know. I'm sure she'll bring it up in a couple weeks at your dissolution hearing. I can't see you before that, except if you come into the restaurant." She got up to leave and gave me a hug. I saw tears in her eyes. She gave me a piece of paper which was her work schedule for the next month. Maybe she wanted to see me. After all, I knew it must be hard on her knowing how Marian was lying to her parents, or that she hadn't told anyone that she and I had been in communication. I did stop by for breakfast whenever I knew she was there. We only had a few minutes to talk, but it was always nice seeing her. I did get a call from my lawyer about our appearance in court. He mentioned that my wife said she was pregnant and was asking for support. She was at the closing of the dissolution with her attorney. I told them we had agreed to our settlement, and it was already done. I wasn't paying anything more. I did tell her attorney that the baby wasn't mine, and I wasn't giving her anything Mary and had health coverage from her job, so it would cover most of the costs of the baby. I knew the baby wasn't mine, so I came up with an idea. I told her attorney I would sign an addendum to the dissolution form that if the child was mine, that I would pay half of any medical bills that would occur, as well as child support till the child was 18. I would also pay for a DNA test at the baby's birth. If the child wasn't mine, she would get nothing from me. She yelled at me, but her attorney said it was a fair offer and she should take it. We signed the addendum and my marriage was over. After signing the final papers, I looked over at Mary and with disdain and said, "By the way, I know you're still sleeping with your old boyfriend, Rob. You might want to tell him he's going to be a daddy." She looked at me with one of those, "How do you know that" looks. I just walked out a free man, but in my gut, I knew that really wasn't much revenge. I still needed it. Real revenge. Now it was time to make a few plans. I often thought that maybe I should just let it all go and go on with my life, but my inner feeling wouldn't let that happen. It constantly nudged at my insights the next time I saw Kathy. I mentioned that I told Mary and that I knew she was sleeping with Rob and she might want to tell him he's going to be a father. God, Jim, you didn't tell her I told you, did you? No, I just blurted it out. No one except the guys at work know. I even come here to see you. I am divorced now. So can we get together? Jim, this is a very busy time for me. I'm working, plus I have my school and finals coming up. I'm graduating with a nursing degree in a few months. Then there is the big problem of dealing with my family. They still blame you for the divorce and getting married and pregnant again. Maybe if I talked with them, they might understand differently someday. Maybe, but this isn't the best time. I'm not avoiding you. In fact, I want to be with you, but the time has to be right. Please try and understand, due to her work schedule and schooling, I could only see her twice a week for breakfast. I told her I could wait as long as she needed me to. I was able to get a little information on the scumbag that had sex with Marion. I decided to start getting even. I knew that the three a-holes didn't always hang out together once in a while. They went to a bar across from the steel mill after work. I had their home addresses thanks to Kathy. She had no idea I was going to use it for revenge. I started my revenge with Tony, the guy that had sex with Moran. He held a knife on me, and I sat there and took it, watching my wife have sex and him laughing at me. I followed him a couple of times to a bar near where he lived. I always kept my distance, never went in. It was pretty much a mixed bar, but predominantly Hispanic. Tony would often go there on Saturday nights, and once in a while during the week and stay for an hour or so, he would ride his motorcycle and park it in the back so no one would mess with it. It was late on a Wednesday night that I followed him to the bar. It was a pretty light night for bars. Since it was a weeknight, it was a dreary, dark night and not much was happening. I waited an hour and was parked in a lot next to the bar. It was near midnight when he came out. I looked all around and didn't see anyone. I put a mask over my face, kind of like a cold weather mask. I took my ball bat and went up behind him. He didn't hear me due to starting his cycle. I swung the bat and caught him across the small of the back. I swung 2 more times, hitting his arms, which he raised to protect his head. He did have his helmet on, but still got his bell rung. I swung 1 last time and caught him in the ribs. He never had a chance to retaliate or see who I was. He fell off his bike, which stopped running as he fell to the pavement in utter pain. He seemed to be conscious, but barely. I headed back to my truck and went home. I guess I was lucky that no one had seen me. It was a stupid thing to do, but sometimes we all do things we shouldn't. It was in the papers the next day that a man was beaten behind the bar. They had no witnesses and no suspects. There was no one that would think I was involved, seeing it was nearly 5 months ago that he drilled my ex-wife, and it was never mentioned in court. Maybe this dissolution turned out better for me. I would have liked for Tony to have known it was me, but that would have caused a whole new set of problems up the road the next time I had stopped in for breakfast. Kathy asked me if I read about Tony getting beat up. I told her I had, but I didn't know much about the area. I'm happy he got his payback. Probably was some other husband getting even with him. I said Kathy stared at me but never asked me if I was involved. The problem would have been that I wouldn't have wanted to lie to her. I did get some satisfaction from beating him too bad. He didn't know it was me, but again, that could present some long-term problems. He was in the hospital for a week, with multiple bruises and fractures. He would be out of work for a month. According to the reports, he had no idea who it was. Because the person was wearing a mask, he didn't even know his attacker. Good thing I wore gloves. It was now time to go after Rob. He was married, so I figured the revenge might be a little easier to attain. I knew that on Saturdays he usually went to see Mary, and thanks to the information I got from Kathy, I figured he told his wife that he was working or out with his friends that way. He had the whole day to be with Moran around noon on Saturday. I went to his house. I knew his wife was named Sheila and was in the same graduating class as Rob and Moran. I knocked on the door and a Nick-looking lady answered. I could see two small children yelling and playing in the living room. "Can I help you?" asked Sheila. "My name is Jim Holder. I'm not quite sure how to say this to you. Your husband is having sex with my ex-wife." Who are you again? Who's your wife? Why are you telling me this? I'm Jim Holder. My wife is Marion Jennings Holder. She was in your high school. I know who the hell she is, the witch. How do you know Rob is screwing her? She came out on the porch and closed the door so her kids couldn't hear. We were at a wedding a few months ago, and I caught them having sex. I didn't know if it was a one-time thing at the time, but after hearing she had been with him before I divorced her, now I find out she has been with him before we were even married, and never stopped having sex with him. Now she is pregnant, and I believe Rob is the father. I know for sure that I'm not. Why should I believe you? I don't even know you, and you come to my house while my husband is at work and accuse him of screwing his old girlfriend. Sounds like you just want revenge. I do want revenge. But it is the truth. Your husband isn't at work today. He's with Mary and at her apartment 40 mile away. He goes there most every week. I can prove it to you. How are you going to do that? I'll call Mary and then ask to speak to Rob. Then I'll hand you the phone. Do you know of any reason why you should be there? Hell no, wait here. While I get the phone, she went inside and brought her phone out. I noticed it was a speaker phone and told her I would use it so she could hear the entire conversation. I dialed my old number and Mary and answered the phone. "Mary, and this is Jim. What the hell do you want?" said Marin. "I know your lover Rob is there and I need to say something to him. Put him on Hun. Not here, you lying 304. I can hear him in the background talking. Hand him the damn phone. She handed Rob the phone and I gave Sheila her phone. "What the hell do you want? You pervert, want to watch me drill your ex-wife again?" He started laughing. Sheila yelled, "You creep, so you're back sleeping with your 304S again? Well, I have news for you. You can just stay there. We're through. Just to get even with your cheating, I'm going to drill. Jim, too, can play this game." Rob mumbled a bunch of that didn't make much sense. He was trying to make excuses, but Sheila told him to go to hell, that he was a lying, cheating creep, and she was getting a divorce. After she hung up, she told me she had no intention of having sex with me. She just said it to get even with Rob. She was a mother and had 2 children to raise. Between her job and the alimony she would get from Rob, she would do quite well. She actually thanked me for telling her the truth. If Rob should ever ask me if I had sex with her, I was welcome to say yes, but in court for the divorce, she would be telling the truth. I did tell her if she needed me as a witness in her divorce case, that I would be willing to testify. I left feeling both good and bad. I got revenge on Rob, but I hurt Sheila and broke up her marriage. She did tell me she thought he had been cheating on her, but never had the evidence on who it might be with. I had to wonder why Rob would have a fling with Mary, and with a nicer-looking woman like Sheila, and 2 kids at home that cared for him. Some guys are just born a-holes, and because some were school athletes, they still think they're studs. Guys like Rob needed to grow up. Sheila did kick his bum out. He couldn't stay with Mary, and because it was too far away from his work, when Kathy found out about it, she wasn't mad at me. If anything, she said her sister deserved it. Her parents were surprised that Rob had cheated on his wife with Mary. And Rob moved in temporarily with Ben and his mother. Ben was divorced a couple of years back. His wife left him for another man. He moved back in with his mother. I did find out that his mom was divorced when Ben was a teenager. She pretty much raised him alone. I guess a lot of us were raised by a single parent. She was a bartender at a neighborhood bar. She had asked Ben not to be a customer there because it made her feel uncomfortable watching him drink the way his father did. She didn't have a problem with Rob moving in temporarily till he could find a place, in case you're wondering. I got most of my information with small talks with Kathy when I stopped in for breakfast. Mary and was getting bigger and would be having her baby in another month or so, according to Kathy. Rob wasn't the kind of guy that could take care of himself. He needed a woman to take care of him. Kathy said that Mary and came to visit her parents one weekend and brought Rob along. According to Kathy, Rob used his razzle-dazzle to explained that he and Sheila had been on the outs for quite some time when he saw Mary, and at the wedding he remembered how much he cared for her. He began seeing her after I filed for divorce. Damn, he could lie. They became close friends again, and now he asked her to marry him. He knew she was going through a lot, and they would wait till after the baby was born, and his divorce was final. They figured they would find a place near Steubenville to live, so Mary and the baby would be near her parents. He got a promotion at the mill, so Mary and wouldn't have to work if she didn't want to. He did say he would be a good father to the baby, even though it was mine. Moran's parents accepted him, lock, stock, and barrel. Kathy said she couldn't believe all the two of them put out. She did her best not to say anything and would just bide her time till school was out, if you haven't figured it out by now. Marian was always their favorite in their eyes. She could do no wrong, needless to say. Kathy and Marian were pretty much opposites. I wanted to be with Kathy, but she was so busy with working at the restaurant, taking her nursing classes, and also helping out at the hospital as a nurse's aide. Maybe her time would come. She always told me I went into the bar with 4 of my friends after work. I couldn't believe it when I saw Rob and Ben sitting there. I didn't know whether to avoid them or confront them. I didn't have much choice when Rob said, "Hey, Jim, I'm screwing your old lady again. You screwed up my marriage, but I still have your ex to drill." They started laughing. "So you're screwing a pregnant 304 who was willing to give out to your friends. Aren't you the lucky one? What do you say you and I step outside and settle this little shouting match? Or are you afraid of going one-on-one? Right, there are only 2 of us and 4 of you evenly matched." He laughed. "The minute I beat you up, they'll all jump in. You mean the way you had it 3-1 at the wedding? She asked for it, and you know it by the way you stay the hell away from Sheila and my kids if you know what's good for you. I don't need a ready-made family. I'll let you support them. You have to say that Sheila is one nice woman, not like the 304 I was married to. Looks to me that you hooked your horse up to the wrong wagon. My friends and I went over and got a booth and had a few beers. I could see Rob and Ben talking and would like to jump on me. But I was with 3 other guys. I would gladly take on either one, as long as it was one-on-one. I went up and got us some more beers, and I heard Ben call me a cuck on the way back. I looked at him and said, "You're next on my list." I know they had to wonder if it was me that beat up Tony months ago. But there is absolutely no proof. B did say, "Hey man, I got no wife or sisters to drill. No marriage to mess up what you gonna do. Screw my old lady." He laughed. I headed back to my table. But I do have to admit that Ben's idea wasn't without merit, my buddies, and I left the bar without incident. They did tell me that they would have my back if I ever needed them. The following Saturday night, I went by myself to a bar I'd never been to before. It was a small neighborhood bar with about a dozen customers. Everyone looked at me, seeing they probably knew everyone who ever came into the place. I sat at the end of the bar and ordered a beer. The bartender was Ben's mother. She was probably in her late 40s and was beginning to show her age. She had a few visible tattoos after setting down my beer. She asked me if I wanted anything else. It was after midnight, but I asked her if it was possible to get anything to eat. "The cook's gone, but I could rustle you up a ham sandwich if you like." I told her that would be great. I hadn't eaten most of the day. She served the other customers and went back and made my sandwich. It had ham, mayo, lettuce, tomato, and cheese. I got a bag of chips to eat with it. Within the hour, most of the customers had left. There were 2 couples still sitting in the booth. Helen was cleaning off the bar and came over to talk to me. "How new here?" "Where are you from?" "I recently got divorced and moved to West Virginia. I work in the lumber yard." I was riding through town and saw this place and decided to get a beer and a bite to eat. "I'm Helen. I've been here for 15 years. We don't get many young guys here. They usually want to pick up some young chick, and we don't get many of those." She smiled. "We're just a small-town community bar. I could use that, too." I laughed. It's been a while since the divorce. I smiled at Helen. She wasn't a bad-looking woman. She wore a low-cut blouse that showed some nice cleavage. She wasn't overweight. In fact, she was on the thinner side. I began kidding with her, and she was flirting back. We talked for a while, and she told me her son moved back in with her and now has his a-hole friend living with him for a few months. She said he was getting a divorce. Also, must be something in the water, she said, and smiled. My ex did a gangbang, and I caught her in the middle of it. I walked out, never to return. I replied, "Damn, honey, sorry to hear that." We continued talking. Helen was nice and personable. I decided to go for it. "Helen, what are you doing after work? What are you really trying to pick me up?" She smiled. "Honey, I'm old enough to be your mother. Mothers like sex, too. I'm just passing through, and we'll probably never see each other again." After smiling, she walked away and took care of the last customers in the booth. She told them it was last call. She came back to the counter. "Look, it's been a while for me, too. Since I've been with a young man like you, I have to finish cleaning up and restocking the bar, and then we could go somewhere. I went behind the bar and helped her restock it. She smiled when she saw that I was helping her out. The last couple had left, and we finished cleaning up the bar. I mentioned to her that I noticed there was a couch and a small bed in the back. I had seen it when I got stock from the back room. It's for passed-out drunks and the like. Haven't had many lately. I've slept there a few times. If I had too much to drink and didn't want to drive home, we went to the room in the back. On the way, she shut off 2 cameras. I asked what they were for, and she told me one for the main bar and the other for the room in back. Can't be too careful anymore. After turning off the camera, she said we don't want to be on video. And she laughed as she went to freshen up. I pulled out the disc she had in the back room video camera and put in a new one and turned it back on. She came out of the restroom and said, "Let's see what you got, honey. We kissed." And I don't mean a peck of a kiss. We started out like 2 dogs in heat. It was only minutes before we were both naked and she was on her back. I've never been with an older woman, and Helen knew what she was doing. She had tattoos above her chest and below her belly. I hadn't been with a woman since I left my ex-wife. I drilled her hard. She screamed out how good it felt that felt so good. "God, you were good," said Helen. She got up and went into the bathroom. She was a really good. I used the restroom, and when I came back, Helen was naked and asleep. I covered her with the sheet. I went over to the camera, turned it off, and took out the disc and put the old one back in. I left out the back door because it's self-locked now. It was time to go back and see my old friends Rob and Ben. Things sure change in a hurry. One day, everything is going along fine, and the net day boom, everything changes. It was on a Saturday, and Kathy was working at Bob Evans. I went and sat in her section. It wasn't as crowded as usual, so we had a chance to talk a little. My feelings for her were strong, but not much I could do about it. As I was ordering my breakfast, I saw her look up at another customer. My back was to them, and I had no idea who it was. Then I heard a voice screw Kathy. "I didn't know they served cucks in here. If you need a man, just let me know, and I'll fix you up with a real one. No need to walk around with this a-hole." I knew the voice it was. Rob Kathy looked scared, but didn't say anything. Everything happened in a flash. I jumped up from my booth, turned around, and cold-cocked Rob with a right cross. I hit him, and he hit the floor. It was then I noticed that Marian was with him. She had already sat down with her big belly. She was due just about any time. I thought she screamed as I jumped on Rob and hit him again. I was sure his jaw was broken, and I could see the bloody nose. Mary and was screaming, and Kathy asked me to please stop. I did as Kathy asked and stood up. I was grabbed by 2 police officers who were in the restaurant eating breakfast. They called in for an ambulance for Rob and took me out in cuffs. I looked back, and both Mary and Kathy were crying. I had to wonder who was crying for whom I was taken off to jail. I called my lawyer, and he said that I was going to be arraigned on Monday on the charges of assault. I would be spending Saturday and Sunday in lockup. It wasn't worth posting bail until after the arraignment. If the charges stuck, I had plenty of time to think I had a somewhat screwed-up childhood and then ended up marrying a 304, but was in love with her sister. When you're in jail, you do a lot of thinking about what could have been. I figured Kathy wouldn't be talking to me anymore if I was lucky enough, not deserve much time. Maybe somehow, some way I could start over, but I would prefer to do it with Kathy. I couldn't get her out of my mind, and I've never even kissed her like you would a girlfriend. I was rain first thing Monday morning. I did call into work to let them know I wouldn't be there on Monday and why I was to call my boss after the arraignment so he would know when I might be coming back. I figured if I had to do some real time, like months, I lose my job. It was a small courtroom with a judge and a witness stand on one side was Rob with his face bruised and his mouth wired up. Sitting next to him was Mary, and staring darts at me behind them was Mr. and Mrs. Jennings. Mary and Kathy's parents. More darts were coming my way. On my side was me and my lawyer. I wondered why Kathy wasn't there. She was a prime witness to what really happened. Other people who were there was the 2 patrolmen who arrested me. We hadn't said 2 words the whole time I was in the cruiser, except they talked about me ruining their breakfast. There were a few other courtroom people, but I really didn't know their positions. I'd never been in court before, but the one time for my divorce dissolution hearing, the judge began by saying this was an arraignment, whether I would be charged with assault and have a criminal trial. The atmosphere was a little lighter, but that he still ran a strict courtroom. He spoke to my lawyer, Mr. Williams. You said that you have a witness that could explain this whole your client finds himself in since Mr. Rob Avery isn't able to speak. I would like to hear from this witness." Kathy came walking into the courtroom. Everyone seemed a bit shocked that she was there. She didn't look at me or her parents, but went right to the witness chair. The clerk, or some lady who was wearing a uniform, swore her in. "Miss Jennings, would you tell us exactly what you observed on the morning in question?" asked the judge. Well, sir, I'm a waitress at the restaurant Jim. That's Mr. Holder there, comes in regularly, and usually sits in my section, as he did that morning as we were talking. I saw Rob Avery and my sister Moran come in, and they started toward my section. "So the woman next to Mr. Aver is your sister, I presume," said the judge. "Yes, and Mr. Avery is her fiancé. They're to be married in a couple of months." I could see Kathy was really nervous. I felt so sorry for her. I wanted to hold her go on. "Miss Jennings, what did you observe Jim back was to Mr. Avery? He never saw who it was till he turned around. I'm sure he knew his voice when he heard him. What did you hear Mr. Avery say to the defendant?" "He actually said it more to me than he did to Jim. I think that was what got Jim so mad. Jim has been called names by Rob a lot of times, but this time he called me names as well as Jim, and Jim retaliated by hitting him. He did more than just hit him, he broke his jaw." "What did he say?" Asked the judge. "He called Jim A and told me that if I wanted to screw around, he would find me a real man, not one that lets other men screw his wife." I looked over at the Jenningses, and they didn't seem very happy. "Mary, and just look down," Kathy continued. "Jim jumped up, turned around, and socked Rob. He went down, and Jim called him an a-hole and hit him again. I yelled for Jim to stop, and he did. That's when the officers came over and arrested Jim and called the paramedics to help rob Mr. Avery there." The judge thought for a moment and asked Kathy what brought all this on. "Why did Mr. Avery call Mr. Holder? This seems to be the basis of the case. Do you any idea why, Miss Jennings?" "Yes, sir. Jim told me it all started at my cousin's wedding nearly 9 months ago. Jim said that he saw my sister Mary, and having sex with 3 men, he said it was consensual. Mary and stood up and said it wasn't true. Mrs. Holder, what part isn't true? Did you or did you not have sex that night with someone other than your husband Mary?" and just started crying and sat down. The judge didn't wait for an answer. The judge asked Rob to stand up. "Mr. Avery, I know it's hard for you to talk, but all you have to do is nod your head. Remember, you are in a court of law, you're under oath, and if you perjure yourself, you could be arrested on the night in question. Did you have sexual relations with Mrs. Holder?" Rob nodded yes. The judge said the record should reflect Mr. Aver's affirmative response. "Did anyone else also have relations that same night with Mrs. Holder?" Rob looked over at Mary and then back at the judge, and again Rob nodded yes, and the judge said the same thing about the record. Mr. and Mrs. Jennings went to get up to leave the courtroom, but the judge told them to stay seated till the hearing was over. "Thank you, Miss Jennings. You've been most helpful. You may be seated." She wasn't sure where to sit, so she sat with her parents. They didn't look very happy with her testimony. He did ask the officers if there was anything they could add, and they said they just did what Miss Jennings stated. They called the ambulance from Mr. Avery and helped the pregnant Mrs. Jennings to her vehicle. They did say that I didn't speak the whole time I was in the cruiser. The judge then asked Mary, and if she had anything she wanted to say. After all, it was a hearing whether to drop the charge against me or charge me with assault. Marion said that she had nothing to add. She did say she was sorry for what happened, but didn't elaborate. The judge spoke. He asked Rob to stand. "Mr. Avery, it seems that this incident was caused by you badgering the defendant who retaliated in kind. I'm not saying that he is not responsible for your medical bills, as I understand it. You have insurance, and it paid all but $200 of your expenses. Is that correct?" Rob nodded yes. "Mr. Holder, please, stand," said the judge. "I understand your retaliation, but you can't go around hitting people because you don't like what they say about you or your girlfriend." I thought even the judge knew I cared for Kathy. "You are responsible for Mr. Aver's unpaid medical bills in the amount of $200. You must pay it within 1 week. I'm putting you on 6 months probation for fighting in a public place. If you come to my courtroom again and are caught fighting or otherwise disturbing the peace, you will serve the balance of the 6 months, plus any other sentence for anything else you do. Is that understood?" "Yes." "Judge, thank you. I'll do my best to stay out of trouble." Rob and Marion left the courtroom matter them when they came in. Kathy told her parents that she was brought up by them to always tell the truth, and that is what she did. She never told them about Mary, and because she asked her not to, besides there was no proof except for me, and they would never believe me over Moran. They turned around and looked at me. Kathy smiled, but the Jenningses looked furious and walked out of the courtroom. My lawyer and I walked out, and he told me to keep my nose clean. He also said I owed Kathy big time. I knew there was no doubt there. I called my boss and told him I would be at work on Tuesday. He seemed happy that he didn't have to fire me. I worked the rest of the week. I couldn't get my mind off thinking about Kathy. I didn't have her cell phone number, and I wouldn't dare call the Jennings house. I wasn't allowed back in the restaurant due to the fight, so I didn't get to see her. I did pull into the restaurant and saw her through the windows. She looked out at me, but then went back to work on Saturday. I went to the bar by myself. I saw B there with some guy I didn't know. B knew what happened to Rob, but didn't say anything. I tossed down the disc and told him it was a movie for him to watch. I suggested he not watch it with anyone else around, including his mother. He gave me a weird look and took the disc. The following weekend, I was back in the bar with a couple of friends. Ben was there with a couple of buddies. Also, he asked to speak to me privately. He didn't seem very happy. I also had to remember I couldn't afford to get in any fights. Ben and I stepped outside. "You screwed my mother." "You a hole, what the hell is the matter with you?" "Listen, Ben, it was your idea. You said I'm not married. I got no girlfriend, no sister. What the are you going to do? Drill my old lady?" Then you laughed at me. I did go see your mom, and she's a nice but lonely person. We spent some time together. As you saw, there are 2 copies of that disc. You have the one, and I have the other. Mine will say buried and probably never be seen again unless you pull some more on me. Remember this? All started because you screwed my wife before she was my ex. So do we call it a truce? Or do we get into it till one of us is in the hospital or in jail? I asked you, promise never to be with my mom again. I can't take that, replied. Ben, she called me honey. She doesn't even know my name. It was a one-time thing for the both of us, so do we have a truce no more? Name-calling? Okay, said Ben. The first beer's on me. We went inside, and we all had a few beers together back on Marion's home front. She had Rob living with her. He would be off for at least 2 months. He figured he would live with her, since Ben's mother kind of wanted him out. Marion had her hands full. Rob wasn't the best homebody and really wasn't much help. The following week, I had just got home from work when my phone rang. I couldn't believe it when I heard Kathy's voice on the other end. "Jim, I have a few things to tell you. Do you have a few minutes for you? I have all night. I didn't know if you would ever talk to me again. I'm sorry you had to testify at my hearing. I know it was hard for you. If it wasn't for you, I'd probably be in jail right now, Jim. I volunteered to testify in your behalf. All I did was tell the truth. My parents were mad at first, but they realized I did the right thing after all. So what do you need to tell me? Mar and had her baby this morning. It's a cute little boy. I don't think they're going to need your DNA because the little fellow is of Hispanic descent." "What? So do you think it was Tony's?" I asked, "What did Rob say?" "I take it he was there." "Yes, he was here, and when he saw the baby was mixed, he left the hospital. He said he wasn't going to father a mixed kid. He thought the baby was his. That's why he was going to marry Marin. He told my parents on the way out that the wedding was off. So, is Marin going to have Tony tested?" I asked. She said maybe to be honest, I don't think she's sure Tony is the father either. She hasn't said either way. Mom and Dad are really pissed at her, but they won't take it out on the baby. They know it wasn't his fault. And it's their first grandchild. They would have preferred him to be white, but not much they can do about that. I think you're looking a lot better to them than Rob does. They don't want him back in their house. Anything else new? You know, like me seeing you. I graduate next week, want an invitation. Sure, I'll be there. You know my address, just send it to me. You can pick it up at the restaurant on Wednesday. I work that day. Kathy, I've been banned from that Bob Evans. I don't need to get arrested. I talked to the owner. I told him the story and that you were protecting me. Even the 2 cops told him that Rob instigated the whole thing. I saw you watching me from outside the restaurant but never came in. So will I see you Wednesday morning? It's my last day at the restaurant. I graduate on Sunday and then have a week off till I start work full-time at the hospital 5 days a week in the maternity ward. Okay, I'll trust you and come to the restaurant. I hope I don't get locked up. Then I'd miss the graduation. I did show up at the restaurant, and she gave me 1 ticket to the graduation and a schedule of when the nursing graduates would be getting their diplomas. In some of the larger colleges, they would have over 1,000 graduates, and they had a particular time frame for the different degrees. The parking lot was so full, they actually bussed people to the stadium where the ceremonies were held. I arrived at the appointed time and went up in the STS. I couldn't believe there were so many graduates. They were wearing one of three colored ropes. Kathy did tell me she would be wearing a white one. I have to admit that didn't narrow it down much. I couldn't believe that in a stadium that big that when I looked over in the next section, I saw Mr. and Mrs. Jennings also sitting with them was Mary, and with a baby in like a big basket. I later found out that Kathy's parents informed Mary and that she would attend her sister's graduation. I was there, but how would I ever know which graduate was Kathy? When they got to the nursing curriculum, a large number of students stood up and lined up to take their walk across the stage and get their degree. Thank goodness for the loudspeakers. They would announce each name when some names were called. You could hear someone yell out things like "Go Barb" or "Right on Brad." You could tell these visitors were proud of their graduates. They were in alphabetical order. So I started listening close when they got to the jail face. Then I heard it, Kathy Elizabeth Jennings. I couldn't help it. I had tears running down my cheeks. I stood up and clapped. I whistled and yelled, "Go, Kathy!" Everyone around me was smiling. I looked over at Mr. and Mrs. Jennings after he saw me cheering for Kathy. He stood up as well as his wife and clapped for Kathy. Also, I was so proud of her, Mary, and looked at me with a somewhat sad look on her face after the announcement of names you could go meet your graduate in a designated area. I looked on my program to see where I might be able to see Kathy. The stadium was wall to wall. People I went to the designated area and saw Kathy and her parents hugging Kathy was crying tears of joy. She even hugged Mary and her vice versa. I stood back about 20 feet. I didn't want to interrupt her moment with her family. All of a sudden, she looked up and saw me. She smiled and ran to me and gave me a big hug, and for the first time ever, she kissed me. Tears were still running down her face. She whispered in my ear, "I love you, Jimmy." Every now and then, she would call me Jimmy. I said, "I love you too, Kathy." Elizabeth Jennings, we hugged once more. My parents are throwing me a party, and all my friends and relatives are going to be there. Are you coming? I'd love to, but I better sit this one out. Not really sure your parents would want me there. I will be there in spirit. We huged one more time, and she went back to her family. I headed home thinking how some people can make you so happy. Kathy was one of those people for me. I figured that was what true love is. You could feel the love of a person just by being with them. When Kathy kissed me, I knew she was the one that completes my life. I stopped at a bar to have a couple of beers. It was funny when I saw Ben there, we talked about nothing in particular. He really wasn't so bad of a guy. I'm happy I didn't beat the crap out of him. After a few beers, it was getting late, and I headed for home. At least the next day was Sunday, and I could sleep in. I thought about Kathy and her graduation party. I really wished I could have been there, but I knew the focus would be on me and possibly Mary, and instead of on Kathy where it belonged, it was near midnight when there was a knock on my door. I wondered who would be there at this time of night. I got up, turned on the light, and answered the door in my briefs. I opened the door to see who it might be. I peeked around the door and saw Kathy standing there. She had the biggest smile on her face. "May I come in?" she asked, of course, "but what are you doing here? What about your party? It was fun. But everyone went home and I thought about you, so I grabbed a night bag and thought I'd come see you." "You don't mind? Do you mind? I'm so happy to see you. The trailer's a mess, but I wasn't expecting company. Do you have clean sheets on the bed?" asked Kathy. "Fairly clean. I changed them 2 days ago, but slept on the couch watching TV. I was really wondering what was going to happen. I'm not stupid, but I never thought Kathy would come here, Jimmy. I might as well say it. I'm in love with you, and I want to make love to you. I have to tell you a few things. First, my parents know I'm here. Here they're not overly happy about it, but they said I was old enough to make my own decisions. They also said they realized that Mary was the problem and not you. I love you, Kathy. You know that, quiet." She then smiled. "Let me finish. Mom asked if I was on birth control pills, and I told her I started on them a few months ago when I realized how much I care for you. I also have to tell you, I'm a virgin. I've never dated much because most guys want the same thing, and I wanted to save myself for the man I love, Jimmy. You better be sure of your feeling for me because I'm betting the rest of my life on you." I took her in my arms and kissed her. We went into the bedroom, and she let me slowly undress her. She was so beautiful I still had on my briefs, but my hard-on was pushing hard against them. "Let it out before it rips your underwear," said Kathy with a smile. We hugged and kissed. Standing there in the bedroom, we made love that night. Later, I got up and used the bathroom. When I came out, Kathy was awake. She used the bathroom and came back to the bed. "What's on the agenda for?" "Today," I asked Kathy, "first, I want you to make love to me again, and then you can take me out for breakfast." I want the world to know that we are officially a couple after making love. We got dressed and went to the Bob Evans where she used to work and sat and had breakfast together after that. She took me to her house and we had a nice talk with her parents. We began dating regularly. We decided that we wouldn't get married for at least a year. She had started her new job and we saw each other at least 4 times a week. We spoke on the phone most every day. She spent quite a few nights at my trailer. We both were saving money for our future. I got along pretty good with her parents. They even apologized for the way they had treated me in the past. I didn't go to the bar very often, but I did see Ben a few times. He told me that when Tony found out Marion's baby was Hispanic, he left for parts unknown. No one knew where he went. He wasn't about to take any DNA test. B found a girlfriend and has been dating Rob, and Sheila did get divorced. But it wasn't final till after he got a rise. Now he pays even more in child support and alimony. I'm willing to make a bet that he didn't think Mary and was worth it. As for Moran, she still lives in her apartment 40 mil away. She does have quite a few friends and as of now is raising the baby on her own. Her parents and Kathy do go see her once in a while. She told Kathy that she made a big mistake in cheating on me and not to make the same mistake. It will never happen, replied Kathy. You see, I really do love him and someday I do want to have his children. Kathy did tell me that Marion is dating, but she's not sure if it's serious or not. As for us, life couldn't be much better, and that's the best revenge.